Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to introduce you my next guest. Her name is Karen Thomas. She had a back surgery in 1982 that led her to her near-death experience, where she saw her deceased family and relatives. She also mentioned that there is no judgment on the other side. Let's welcome her, Karen Thomas.
Hello.
Hello, Karen.
Hi, Marionette.
How are you
I'm
today?
good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. My son is a little bit sick. He has
Oh,
this stomach ache, and I think I'm having it too, a little bit.
oh no.
But don't worry about it because I'm still feeling good till now.
Good. Good. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Um, Thank you so much for being here. I'm so honored and so blessed to have you here. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
oh, no problem. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you invited me. Thank you.
Yes, your story was so inspiring. Oh, people has to hear that. So,
Oh, oh, thank you. Thank you for helping that come about.
yes. Um would you be so kind and share your story with us?
Certainly, certainly.
Thank you.
Okay, my near-death experience took place in 1982 in Alaska, so a long time ago. I was a physical therapist at that time, and my husband and children and I had moved to Alaska and had been there for about a year. I hurt my back during my work as a therapist, and I had hurt my back previously a few years before, and so this time the doctors thought that they might have to do a fusion instead of a laminectomy, and that concerned me in terms of losing my career, because a fusion would be really debilitating for a heavy lifting job like physical therapy. So I contacted friends back in New York State where we had moved from, and church members and friends in Alaska, and asked people once I had my surgery date if they would pray for me that day, that I would not have to have a fusion. And so that was kind of the lead up to my circumstance. And then on the day of surgery, my husband and children came to the hospital. I was one of the first in the morning surgeries that was scheduled. And they walked beside my stretcher as I was taken down to the operating suite area. And just before going into there, they were sent to a waiting room to wait until after surgery to hear, how things had gone. So my stretcher was pushed into the OR suite. The hospital I worked at and where this was taking place was one of the major trauma centers for the state of Alaska. So there were multiple different operating rooms in this suite. So I went, was pushed past a number of them and into an operating room. And I remember moving off from the stretcher onto the operating table. And I remember having to turn onto my stomach and having anesthetic go through an IV to me. And then, of course, I was unconscious as they were doing surgery. However, at some point after, I suddenly was conscious, but not conscious of laying with my face down. I was my consciousness was literally up in a corner of the operating room, up very close to the ceiling. And so I was able to actually be viewing these ceiling tiles. And at the same time, I was hearing all of this ruckus going on, which drew my attention back down. And as it drew my attention that way, I was able to see them flipping my body over from being on my face to being face up, and seeing a nurse who was rushing out as the doctor was swearing at her and saying that needed to get more blood, and an anesthesiologist who was saying, we're losing the blood pressure. And I realized as I'm seeing all this that was my body. And I realized that if I was not inside my body, then maybe that meant that I had died. And I wasn't concerned about my body, about my physical self. I felt literally very calm and detached from my body. But I did begin to think about my husband and my kids in a waiting room. And I thought, oh, somehow I have to let them know it's okay anyway. I am still alive. I'm still me. And as I was concerned about that, my consciousness began to drift and drifted right through the wall of this operating room out into the hallway I had come down. And then down that same hallway back, kind of retracing where I had come from. And there were double doors at the entryway to the operating suite area. And once again, I drifted right through the doors and out into a hallway. And I was continuing to move along in this hallway when I suddenly heard a telepathic voice. And it said to me, pay attention to this man. And then I realized that there was a man that was rushing back toward me. And as I was supposed to pay attention to him, I suddenly was able to see very up close, like a zoom in of what he looked like, what he was wearing, his hair color and his eyes and everything, and even heard his thoughts. And he was thinking, I need to get in there fast. I have to get in there fast. And so my consciousness turned as he went by me. And then he went back toward those double doors. And as he was getting close to them, I heard another man's thoughts who was down close to those doors also. And this man was thinking, what does this guy think he's doing? He's not allowed to go in there. That's an operating room suite. And the man I was supposed to pay close attention to had kind of slowed down and stopped for a moment. And as he did, then those electronic double doors opened up and he rushed on through them and into the operating suite. And as soon as he did that, my attention was gone back to, I've got to find the waiting room. I've got to find my husband and the kids. But as soon as I thought that, it was as though I wasn't directing where my consciousness could go anymore. And I was literally being moved as opposed to me moving myself. And my consciousness was moving up through the ceiling of the floor that I was on, and then up through the next floor of the hospital and up through the ceiling again until I literally was completely out of the roof, well up over the hospital itself. There were mountains in the background because this hospital is located on the outskirts of Anchorage, and the Chugach Mountains are right behind that. And I kept going up to about the height of the mountains. And then all of a sudden I was drawn directly toward the city of Anchorage. And instead of staying in the outskirts, I was being pulled over the city. And the city sits on an inlet of water. And as I reached the point where the water begins, a huge tunnel-like, cave-like opening, portal type of thing opened up, and I was sucked into this tunnel that was very, very dark. And once I was in it, I began moving very, very fast, much, much faster than I had been prior to that. And the only thing I could see initially was way, way off in the distance, a little prick of light, of bright light. But because I was moving so fast, that light was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I actually was burst right into the light itself. And as I did, I was no longer inside this tunnel, I was in a totally different location. And it was nothing like Anchorage in Alaska, and was bright. And the feeling I got as I was pulled into this light was just a huge burst of love that was just filling me and all around me. And like it was the whole atmosphere, and everything was love and peace. And it was just so amazing. And I got thinking, where am I? So I looked down, thinking I'm looking down at my feet, and I had no feet, but I could see the ground was very like brown and rocky and desert-like, very dry. And as I was looking at that and being startled about, what it looked like, again, I heard a new telepathic voice, a different one than in the hospital. And this was a man's voice, and he was saying, "Follow me." And as he said that, my attention was drawn off to my left, and I could see that there was a man who was going up a slope out of this dry, arid area that I had come out into. He was going up this slope to go out of it. And as soon as he said that, I was like 2 or 3 feet behind him. And so I'm looking closely at him, and I'm thinking, who is this? And I could feel a sensation of him caring for me, and that I should know him almost, that we should know each other and be close to one another, but I had no idea who it was. And the back of him, he had almost black hair, and he had it pulled back and tied with a piece of leather, so that it was, if it hadn't been tied, would have been past shoulder length. And he had, the garment that he was wearing was, I guess, kind of like a Roman toga, in that it was off-white, very simple and very plain, and about the length of midway down his thigh, above knees. And again, another simple leather tie around his waist. And on his feet, he had sandals, but they were unusual sandals in that they had also leather ties that crisscrossed back and forth up the back of his calves, and then tied right below the knees. And I remember thinking, as I looked at him, this isn't Jesus, and I thought, well, I'm Christian. I thought if I was dead, that the first person I would see would be Jesus. And I knew it wasn't. And yet he was just so kind and so nice. And so I just kept following him. And as we went up and over this slope, the entire scenery changed, and it became lush and green, and a beautiful meadow that was filled with, just bursting with flowers of colors that you can't even imagine. And everything, grass and trees and leaves and these flowers, everything was filled with light. And the light was actually glowing out of it. And it was just so beautiful to see. And as I was just mesmerized with this, the man that I had followed, that I started to call my guide, he went ahead and he spoke again telepathically and again said, "Follow me." And I was right up behind him once again. And by this time he was on the bank of a river. And this river was about 20 feet wide. And it was the most beautiful, clear, glistening, bright, again, living like everything else and giving off light. It was just gorgeous. And on the opposite bank, I realized that all of my deceased family members were there. My father had died when I was 7, and my brother had been killed in a car accident when I was in my 20s. And both of them were there, but also aunts and uncles that I had who passed away. And then 4 people that I knew just I could feel their love for me, and they didn't look familiar to me, but it just came to me. I just knew these were my four grandparents. All four of my grandparents had died before I was born. And so they were there too. And it was like a huge welcoming family reunion saying, "Oh, she's here. She's here. Isn't it great? It's wonderful to see her." And so I wanted to go, across that river to be with them. But my guide said, "No, no, you can't do that now. We have someplace else you have to go first." So I followed him. Reluctantly, I followed him. It was like I was being drawn all the way through this whole experience. I wasn't directing myself. And he went down and around a curve in the river. And once we went around this curve in the river, it went into a big opening. And the opening in the center of it was an enormous building. Huge, huge, pearlescent white, gorgeous, looked like if you pictured a Greek temple or a Roman temple with huge columns and gorgeous marble steps going up. And he went up to this huge doorway and said, "Follow me again." And I, at this point, I could see other spiritual people who were in the opening where this building was, and two or three would be at the foot of the stairs, and a couple more might be coming down the stairs. And they were just dressed like in simple white clothing, flowing type clothing. And no one that I recognized who they were, but interesting, it just got my attention. When we went inside the doorway, it opened up into a huge library. And this library was filled on both sides with story upon story upon story of books and old scrolls, and just crammed in on either side. And as far up as you could see, I couldn't really even see a ceiling to it. Down through the middle were all of these tables. And at the tables, sitting at them, were other spiritual people, or standing at the end of the table and looking at books. And my guide said, "This is where the book of life is stored, but this is not where we're going now. We're going to a different room." So we went completely down through this huge open room with the tables and into a small hallway. And then just a short distance in this hallway, and it opened a door and went into a much smaller room. And this room had like an oval conference table, and around it were a whole number of other spiritual people. And as though they were waiting for us to come in. And the feeling I got as soon as I came in here was, I should know these people. They all love me. They all care about me. And somehow I just knew that they had helped me plan my life and the things that would happen in my life. And so my guide said at that point, "We're going to show you your life review, everything that has happened in your life up to this point." And when he said that, the center of this conference table area, it looked as though it was glass or clear in the middle, but up from that clear area came like a hologram of all of the different events from the beginning of my life up to that point. And as I was looking at it, and they were all looking at it, I was actually feeling as though I was living it all over again, but also being able to be the other person that I was talking to or interacting with. I could feel everything that they were feeling at the same time as feeling my own feelings. And it was so interesting because there were times when I had been really, did a nice thing, but never gave it much of a second thought. And this other person, it really meant a lot to them. and then they carried it forward into other things in their life. And same thing when I did a hurtful thing or said something hurtful and just offhand hadn't really thought that it was that big a deal. And then I could see that the other person really felt hurt by that so much that they went on with their life, and the next things that they were doing were unkind acts towards someone else who didn't deserve anything. They just had carried it over from me. So personally, I was feeling really bad for the things that I could have done better. But all of the spiritual beings were saying or communicating telepathically, no, you're learning. You're seeing why it was important to act in this kind way. And that's what makes such a big difference for everyone. And when you do something hurtful, you need to be more conscious of the fact of how someone else may feel. So it just helps you to grow and be a better person, is basically what they were saying. No, condemnation, no, shame on you, no, you have to pay for that now. Nothing like that. It was all educational and growth oriented, and it was just beautiful. And they communicated then, you can stay here now, or you can return back to your life. But if you do, and if you decide you want to return to your life, we want to show you things that are going to happen in your life if you go back to it. Some of them for certain will happen, and others will not necessarily. They can change because every person has free will. And people that you're going to be interacting with, if you go back to your life, they may choose something that totally removes this event and changes it, and so that it doesn't come about. So that was fascinating. I don't remember what happened after that. I know something else did, but that has been blanked out of my memory. And the next thing I was really aware of was being away from this room with all of the spiritual people, and in another even smaller room with only my guide with me. And he was saying to me telepathically, I want to show you the waiting room in the hospital. You're going to decide whether you're going to go back to your life or not. So I want to show you these things. And so I instantly could see, like through the ceiling of the waiting room, that my husband and my children were in. And I could see my children at this little couch area and my husband up near a doorway into this waiting room. And standing in the doorway, the doctor who had operated on me in his surgical garb, and he was talking to my husband. So I could see off to the right, I could see all of these musical notes, like you would see on a score of music if you were playing an instrument and you were needing to see what note to play, how long to hold the note, all of that. And these notes were just black and white, and a whole note, a half note, a quarter note. But every note was, instead of going horizontally across a piece of paper, it was going vertically, one hooking to the next. And my guide said, these notes are representing all the prayers that people are praying for you, like you ask them to. And he said, every prayer that a person prays has its own unique vibration. And these prayers are reaching upward toward us. And then I looked back and I saw my daughter praying, because she thought the doctor coming so late after they had waited all this time meant that I had died. And so she was praying that I hadn't died and that I would live. And so her prayer became one more of these musical notes, and was actually the last one that reached completely up to us. And when that happened, I was allowed to feel all of my emotions as my Karen self again. And so I was just flooded with this strong feeling of, oh, I don't want my kids to grow up without me. I don't, I don't want that to happen. I want to live my life. And I need to be there for all of them, for my husband and for the kids. And as soon as I thought that, my guide said, then you can return to your life. You will be given proof that this actually happened. You won't be able to remember everything that happened. You won't be allowed to remember the things from your future that we showed you, because if you did, you wouldn't have free will any longer, because you would say, oh, this is going to happen, and so I have to do thus and such. It wouldn't be my free will any longer. And so he said, so those things you won't remember, but you will know that, there will be proof that this actually happened to you. And so you can return. And as soon as he said that, the next thing that I was aware of was no trip going back to my body or going back into my body, nothing like that. But I just was waking up in a recovery room, and my husband and the kids were there. And my consciousness that operates through my brain was very befuddled and half under anesthesia still. And it was thinking, why was I in the hospital? And then I looked down and I saw this big bloated stomach. And I thought, oh, I must have had a baby. Maybe I had a cesarean section. I mean, I just could not remember what I was even there for. But at the same time, I was filled with all this enormous love and peace that I had felt on the other side. And it was just all around me like a protective bubble in me. And I thought, oh, it really happened. And I could remember all of the things like I just said to you, clear as a bell. So that consciousness was my spirit's consciousness, and it was completely clear. And within the days in the hospital, not long after, I was in there for a total 12 days, but within a short period of time, doctors were coming in and checking on me. I had been in ICU and I had been through a lot. And this one doctor walked in, and as soon as he came through the door, I recognized the man who I had been told to pay close attention to in the hallway. And he was the doctor who had actually performed another surgery and saved my life, because what had happened during my back surgery is the first surgeon had accidentally pulled a hole out of the second largest artery in my body that goes down to one of my legs. And so I had bled out completely on the operating room table. The second doctor had repaired that artery and, been able to save my life. So that was amazing. And after I had been home and had to go to this second doctor in order to I had staples all down the front of my abdomen. And he had to remove those staples. And I made up my mind that I wanted to ask him about what I saw when I was out of my body, when my consciousness saw him in the hallway. So at that follow-up appointment, I did tell him about what I saw and what he was wearing, what color jacket, all of that. And his comment was, how could you know that? And he said he had been in his office seeing patients, and he had been paged to come stat to the hospital, and that there was a patient that they want him to try to save, see if he could save. So that is my story, and that is my experience.
Wow. What an amazing story you have. I have goosebumps all the time, the whole time. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Oh, wow.
Oh, I'm happy to share it. I'm happy to share that.
Wow. I have some questions, if that is okay
Yeah.
with you. Could you explain us a bit what you were like as a person prior to your NDE? And were you a believer of God then?
Yes, I was. As I said, I was Christian and expecting to see Jesus um, when I had my near death experience. Um, when I came back after my near death experience, if anything, I had an even greater love of God, because that love of God was everywhere. It filled everything in but I had changes in how I felt, because before I had my experience, I really worried about, was I a good enough person to be able to go to heaven?
Judgment.
And just as importantly, people that I had loved who had passed away, were they able to go to heaven also? Some of them had, a couple of them anyway, had some real rough times with drinking, and I, before I had my experience, I worried that I would never see them again in the afterlife, because maybe they didn't go to heaven. And so all these worries and concerns and worries about judgment and stuff,
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
Because I would judge my kids harshly sometimes, because I wanted them to be good enough to go to heaven. I wanted all of us to be able to go to heaven. And I just felt like there was no strong judgment that I experienced at all. The only judgment I had felt was what I judged myself to have wished I had done better when I saw my life review, for example. But other than that, I just felt completely loved and accepted. And I just knew that God loved all of us that way. Yeah. So yeah, I still definitely, I very much love God, and I just want other people to know how much they're loved too.
Because we know there's no judgment, God is forgiving. It doesn't give us also the right to just hurt people because there's no judgment. We choose.
Absolutely. We have to learn more about how important that love and kindness is toward others, always. One of the things that people have said to me sometimes is, well, if you don't think that God's going to judge you, or that you might possibly go to hell, then why don't you just do any old bad thing, that you feel like doing? Why don't you go rob banks or shoot people or do me, and my immediate response to that is, oh, are you only not doing those things because you fear that you're going to go be sent to hell? Is that the only reason why you're not behaving like that? Mm-hmm. Because that's the point, is that you don't need to be threatened with dire punishment in order to love your baby that you just gave birth to and that gets put into your arms. That love is natural within us, and that desire to be kind to other people is there within us. It isn't something that is threatened into us, if you know what I mean. In fact, threatening tends to do the exact opposite. It creates a fear, and a fear then creates defensive, negative, hurtful actions. So, I've come to feel much different than I did prior to my experience.
Yes, I did not have a near death experience like you, but I had an awakening, and I see life different now, and there's no turning back. It's like,
right.
Yes, it's. I believe that we are, made of souls, and the souls are made of love. And you said something like, you said it felt so familiar there, as if you knew this person. So do you believe maybe we have met these people already before, like a sort of reincarnation?
Yes, I do feel that way. It's amazing. That again is something that I had never even considered before, but I definitely do feel that there is reincarnation, that we have groups of souls who work together and who try to help one another in life experiences. And my guide, after I returned to my life, I learned about meditation, and I began to meditate. And as I learned meditation, I sometimes would see things or kind of get communicated, like almost like the telepathic communication I experienced in my near-death experience, where I would suddenly have a knowing of something.
Really?
And
Wow.
you know, and so I in my meditation, I would from time to time see my guide that I had seen while I was in my near-death experience, and he would communicate things to me. And so I've studied a lot since then too. I've studied about spiritual growth and about people who have had near-death experiences and those that have had spiritually transformative experiences, like you were mentioning about yourself, where it's just never the same after that. And you read and you learn and study, and you find out more and more that reinforces that importance of your spirit and your soul being full of love, and us being here to extend that love to other people and help them in the same way.
Oh, wow. Thank you. One more question. You said when you were in the desert, you were like, you could not see your feet.
Right.
In which shape were you think? Was it like an orb, or?
I think it was probably a rounded orb type of a thing. I felt as though my body was still my body, but it wasn't. I felt as though I was like standing upright, or I was, looking a certain way, but I wasn't actually having my head turn. It was just my consciousness itself was what made up me. And so, and I've heard people talking about the spirit outside of the body often being, like an orb. And I think that, like, though I saw my family members as physical bodies and the spiritual beings as physical bodies, I've learned from my studies that you can, on the other side, you can present yourself as a physical body, and maybe as one that you especially liked, or an age that you felt happiest in when you were alive. And so a lot of times, like the people who were my grandparents, and I knew they were my grandparents, I had never seen them in my life, and yet they looked to be the same age as like my brother and the other people who were there. So it was an age that when they were vibrant and alive, and just wanted to express themselves that way. And I'm a genealogist also, so I hadn't started doing research about my family history until after my, really in depth, until after my near-death experience. And so I found eventually pictures of my grandparents when they were young people. But I had not ever seen them at the time I had this experience, but they looked like the very young versions of themselves, the pictures that I eventually did find and see.
Wow.
So, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like what I'm doing with these interviews, for example, is something that's very, very good for my own personal spiritual growth, but also for other people to communicate what I've learned. And rather than writing a book or doing something like that, I've just been more drawn to one-on-one, like our conversation here, and having it be videoed or go out and reach more and more people. And because of that, I generally will also leave my email address.
Yes,
because sometimes people who see my interviews would like to, they think of a particular concern they might have, or a question or something. If they email me and they say in the subject line, your near-death experience or near-death experience interview, then I know it's someone who wants to reach to me about my near-death experience. anyway, my email address is BLANCETH@live.com.
Okay, I will just put it below the description. I'll just
Okay.
paste it there that they know where to contact you. Thank you very much for that. Like me, I I wrote to you because I was just so fascinated, and yeah, you're like an inspiration to me.
Oh,
And
thank you.
everything, many things, like I questioned before, now it's clear. It's clear to
Yes.
me, like there's no judgment, and I am. I taught my kids that there is judgment and don't be naughty and like this. So within a short period of time, I have to change and tell
Yes.
them something else, and then they're a little bit confused. But I think they need more time to understand that, but it will come.
Yes, I'm sure it will, because you know, I was quite a bit different person after my near-death experience, and my kids were somewhat surprised at oh, she's not getting upset and thinking that I'm naughty as much as she did, and wow, what's different, why, and and it took a little bit of adapting, but I think in the long run has been much better, for them. I'm
Oh,
so glad I was here for them. Some people have said to me, "Oh, I wish I could have a near-death experience." And I usually will say, "You wish you could have a spiritually transformative experience." A near-death experience most often leaves people with physical things
yes.
that can be really difficult to deal with and
Traumatizing.
impact their life in ways that make them hard. So if you can have that same awakening and that same spiritual transformation and not have, physical body damage to have to deal with, that's the
That's
better way to
perfect. That's
go.
perfect. Yes, exactly. What lessons have you learned from your near-death experience?
The lessons, there's lots of them, I guess, but it really boils down most to that love is the most important thing.
Wow.
That whatever circumstance that you're dealing with, if you can step away from it a bit objectively and look at it and say, how would love be expressed best in this situation? Am I most loving if I argue with someone and try to convince them I'm right? Or am I most loving if I treat them kindly and act lovingly toward them, whether they totally disagree with my own personal opinions or not? And just that's just one example, but I guess some people have said, whatever the question is, love is the answer.
Exactly.
So, and that kind of helps a lot.
Everything is all about love, I think, on earth, and the other dimension. It's all about love. Yeah, it's nice to know that.
It is.
Yeah,
It
and
is.
that's the purpose why I've created this channel. I just had a calling. I felt like I had a calling to share also my experience, and to share more love everywhere, and to spread the awareness that like death is not the end but the doorway to infinity. So
Absolutely. Absolutely
yes,
right. There are so many books that help along those lines too, that people can find as they go along. I love, I don't know if you've ever heard of Michael Newton, who was a hypnotherapist. And he has written books. One is called Journey of Souls, and another is called Destiny of Souls. And in his hypnotherapy practice, he found people who he was treating for issues that they were having problems with in their life. And he learned how to relax them so deeply that they were able to reconnect with their time on the other side before they were born,
Wow.
and to learn about what their soul group had done, worked together on and planned for their life. And just so many very interesting things. And so that
Would you
those are some of the
also
many things that I've learned
also
about.
send me that link of those books, then I can put it also below the description? That's an interesting
Sure,
book.
sure.
He is from America?
Yes, there. He was in America. He has passed away, but he is
Oh,
trained. There are a whole group of
cool.
people who are trained hypnotherapists, trained in his technique, that are working with people today. And I have worked with one of those hypnotherapists myself, and
Oh,
so it's one of the things that is helpful.
oh, that's nice. Thank you for
So I
sharing.
will email that to you.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
Can you share your understanding why our soul choose to come here on earth and experience this? Is there wisdom or knowledge that can be gained from these experiences that have value on the other side? Maybe it's too much
Yes.
question, but you can make it short. No
Yep.
problem.
Those two books I mentioned to you do a lot in depth about that.
Wow.
And another one, there is one other book that I'll also tell you about. It's called Your Soul's Plan. It's by a Robert Schwartz. And again, these are books that have helped inform me on what I have learned myself through my own meditation and stuff. It's just kind of expanded it from there. I think that many times, one of the things that are really difficult to understand is why people have very painful experiences in their life.
Yeah.
Say, for example, having a child that they lose to cancer is just one example.
Yeah.
And soul groups can work together and say, you are trying to become more loving through compassion for other people. And I will be a child who will be born to you in this next life. And I will not be there for a long, full life. I will have to leave. But your relationship with me as I go through my cancer experience is going to be so valuable to you in growing in love and compassion. You want to be a more compassionate person, and I will help you do that through this life that we're going to live together. So that's just kind of a capsule view of why, because I think one of the things that people don't understand when they think that there is only one life that they will ever live, is if they feel that way, then it's very hard to realize how loving God actually is, because they will look at anything that's very painful or hurtful and they'll say, if God really, really loved me and wanted me to be loving too, why would this hurtful thing happen?
Exactly.
How could he possibly do that? But God is so much bigger than people realize. And God is allowing us so many lifetimes to experience every side of every type of thing that could make us a more full and complete and loving spirit.
Wow.
And so that is kind of how that works.
Oh, thank you for your answers and your explanation. Oh, you explained it so well. Oh, so nice. Thank you so much, Karen, for being here on my channel.
I'm very glad to do it. So glad that I could help. And I will email you with those 3 books, their titles and the authors.
Oh,
and
thank you
that
so
you
much.
can attach. And if people feel like reaching out to me with an email, as long as they tell me it's about near death and stuff.
Oh, I'm sure many souls will be touched with your story, with this video. Thank you so much. And
I thank you. You're the first person who isn't from America who has interviewed me. So I'm so happy that you've reached out to me from overseas
And
and
I'm
asked me
so
for an interview.
happy for replying my messages. I was really jumping of joy. I could not sleep with every guest I have. It's like I cannot believe, this is a calling, and I'm so honored to do it. It's really it's coming from my heart, and
It's very clear. It's easy
oh,
to see how much it's coming from your heart.
thank you so much. And yes, and have a nice day.